automatic weapon. This is a matter of national security. We also need to make it harder for people to buy powerful assault weapons, like the ones that were used in San Bernardino. I know there are some who reject any gun safety measures, but the fact is that our intelligence and law enforcement agencies, no matter how effective they are, cannot identify every would-be mass shooter, whether that individual is motivated by ISIL or some other hateful ideology. What we can do, and must do, is make it harder for them to kill. Next, we should put in place stronger screening for those who come to America without a visa, so that we can take a hard look at whether they've traveled to war zones. And we're working with members of both parties in Congress to do exactly that. Finally, if Congress believes, as I do, that we are at war with ISIL, it should go ahead and vote to authorize the continued use of military force against these terrorists. For over a year, I have ordered our military to take thousands of airstrikes against ISIL targets. I think it's time for Congress to vote to demonstrate that the American people are united and committed to this fight. My fellow Americans, these are the steps that we can take together to defeat the terrorist threat. Let me now say a word about what we should not do. We should not be drawn once more into a long and costly ground war in Iraq or Syria. That's what groups like ISIL want. They know they can't defeat us on the battlefield. ISIL fighters were part of the insurgency that we faced in Iraq. But they also know that if we occupy foreign lands, they can maintain insurgencies for years, killing thousands of our troops, draining our resources, and using our presence to draw new recruits. The strategy that we are using now, airstrikes, special forces, and working with local forces who are fighting to regain control of their own country, that is how we'll achieve a more sustainable victory. And it won't require us sending a new generation of Americans overseas to fight and die for another decade on foreign soil. Here's what else we cannot do. We cannot turn against one another by letting this fight be defined as a war between America and Islam. That, too, is what groups like ISIL want. ISIL does not speak for Islam. They are thugs and killers, part of a cult of death. And they account for a tiny fraction of more than 1 billion Muslims around the world, including millions of patriotic Muslim Americans who reject their hateful ideology. Moreover, the vast majority of terrorist victims around the world are Muslim. If we're to succeed in defeating terrorism, we must enlist Muslim communities as some of our strongest allies, rather than push them away through suspicion and hate. That does not mean denying the fact that an extremist ideology has spread within some Muslim communities. There's a real problem that Muslims must confront without excuse. Muslim leaders here and around the globe have to continue working with us to decisively and unequivocally reject the hateful ideology that groups like ISIL and Al-Qaeda promote. To speak out against not just acts of violence, but also those interpretations of Islam that are incompatible with the values of religious tolerance, mutual respect, and human dignity. But just as it is the responsibility of Muslims around the world to root out misguided ideas that lead to radicalization, it is the responsibility of all Americans, of every faith, to reject discrimination. It is our responsibility to reject religious tests on who we admit into this country. It's our responsibility to reject proposals that Muslim Americans should somehow be treated differently. Because when we travel down that road, we lose. That kind of divisiveness, that betrayal of our values, plays into the hands of groups like ISIL. Muslim Americans are our friends and our neighbors, our co-workers, our sports heroes. And yes, they are our men and women in uniform who are willing to die in defense of our country. We have to remember that. My fellow Americans, I am confident we will succeed in this mission because we are on the right side of history. We were founded upon a belief in human dignity, that no matter who you are or where you come from or what you look like or what religion you practice, you are equal in the eyes of God and equal in the eyes of the law. Even in this political season, even as we properly debate what steps I and future presidents must take to keep our country safe, let's make sure we never forget what makes us exceptional. Let's not forget that freedom is more powerful than fear. That we have always met challenges, whether war or depression, natural disasters or terrorist attacks, by coming together around our common ideals as one nation and one people. So long as we stay true to that tradition, I have no doubt that America will prevail. Thank you. God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America.
The President of the United States speaking live to the nation from the Oval Office, a rare Oval Office speech by the President. The last time he spoke from the Oval Office was 5 years ago when he announced that U.S. forces would be ending their combat role in Iraq. So a symbol of how much importance he placed on this address. The address, however, was mostly a restatement of the President's strategy against ISIS, or ISIL as he calls it, the terrorist army that now occupies much of Syria and Iraq, a restatement of his policies that were in existence before San Bernardino 4 days ago and before Paris earlier this month, or I should say last month. Major Garrett is at the White House for us tonight. Major, what did you see?
It's a speech in two parts, Scott. One, operational. As you said, resetting the president's agenda and his strategy, which has come under a lot of Republican criticism on the presidential campaign trail against ISIS. The president talked about special operations forces, but it's important to point out, Scott, those are new additions to the strategy. One that, with their very presence in Syria first, now in Iraq, is an admission by this White House and the Pentagon behind it that the original strategy of bombing from the air was not working effectively. Secondarily, the president on the operational side here at home said we should have more gun control. That was tried and it failed in the Senate last week. Maybe the president will try another attempt on that. That's going to be a tough slog with the Republican Congress. But the second part of the speech, the one I think the president was most interested in, was the values component of the speech. That the country must come together, that stigmatizing Muslim Americans is not only against American values, but operationally ignorant, because it plays into the ISIS or ISIL narratives and undermines U.S. counterterrorism efforts. That is a direct reflection, Scott, and people here at the White House openly concede this, to the kind of rhetoric the president has heard from some Republican candidates, most notably the frontrunner, Donald Trump.
Major Garrett reporting from the White House. As always, Major, thank you very much. The president also asked on Congress to take a number of actions. One, to close a loophole that actually allows anyone on the terrorist watch list, the no-fly list, allows them to buy a weapon in the United States. He says Congress should close that loophole. And he asked Congress also to take a vote that essentially declares war on ISIS, to join him in a public statement against ISIS. The president also asked Congress to make it harder to buy assault weapons, as Major Garrett just mentioned. The president made a major appeal this evening to Muslims to help in the fight against Islamic extremism, and also reminded Americans that Muslims are our neighbors, our friends, as he put it, even our sports heroes and the people who serve in our U.S. military. There will be much more about the president's address and the latest on the San Bernardino investigation on your local news on this CBS station. As always, on our 24-hour digital news network, CBSN, and in the West tonight on the CBS Evening News. I'm Scott Pelley, CBS News in Washington. Most of you will be returning to 60 Minutes after these messages.
For news 24 hours a day, go to CBSNews.com.